Honey, are you sure you filled out the right application? This is the FBI, not the Federal Bureau of Knitting, Agent Miller drawled, a condescending smirk playing on his lips as he looked at Sarah Parsons' unassuming application. Sarah, 35, dressed in a simple blouse and skirt, her demeanor quiet and thoughtful, merely nodded. Yes, sir. I believe my background in forensic accounting and my advanced pattern recognition skills are directly applicable. Miller and his colleague exchanged amused glances. Pattern recognition? For what, spotting a sale at the department store? They laughed. Weeks later, that same simple woman stood before a stunned task force, pointing to the almost invisible anomaly in a mountain of data that had eluded their top analysts for months, cracking the unsolvable white-collar crime syndicate wide open. If you believe brilliance often hides in plain sight, let me know where you're watching from today. Enjoy the story. Sarah Parsons was the kind of woman who blended into the background. Her colleagues at the mid-sized accounting firm where she'd worked diligently for 10 years knew her as quiet, meticulous, and unfailingly polite. She wasn't one for office politics or self-promotion. Her passion lay in the intricate dance of numbers, the hidden stories within complex spreadsheets, the subtle patterns that emerged from seemingly chaotic data. She saw connections others missed, a skill honed not in flashy presentations, but in long, quiet hours of focused analysis. She dressed simply, neat blouses, comfortable skirts or slacks, sensible shoes, her appearance as understated as her personality. Few knew of her fierce intellect, her almost preternatural ability to spot anomalies, or her secret ambition to apply her unique skills to something more meaningful than corporate audits. She dreamed of working for the FBI, specifically in their white-collar crime division, where she believed her pattern recognition abilities could make a real difference. It was a long shot. She didn't have the typical law enforcement or Ivy League law degree background so many agents possessed. But she had an unwavering belief in her abilities and a meticulously prepared application highlighting her successes in uncovering sophisticated financial fraud within her firm, successes often quietly attributed to her more assertive supervisors. The day of her initial interview at the FBI field office was daunting. The building itself was imposing, all steel and reinforced glass, radiating an aura of serious, no-nonsense authority. Sarah, clutching her portfolio, felt a flutter of nerves but also a quiet determination. She was ushered into an interview room where two seasoned agents, Miller and Davies, awaited her. Agent Miller, older, with a cynical glint in his eye and a reputation for being a tough interrogator, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his gaze sweeping over Sarah with an expression that was already bordering on dismissive. Agent Davies, younger but equally sharp, offered a curt nod. "Ms. Parsons," Miller began, his voice a low growl, "your application is unorthodox. Forensic accounting, yes, we see that, but your primary experience is in the private sector, and this emphasis on advanced pattern recognition skills—" He paused, a condescending smirk forming. "Honey, are you sure you filled out the right application? This is the FBI, not the Federal Bureau of Knitting." Agent Davies chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, Agent Miller, I'm quite sure. My background in forensic accounting has involved tracking incredibly complex financial trails, often identifying fraudulent activities designed to be untraceable. My pattern recognition skills allow me to see anomalies and connections in vast data sets that standard analytical tools often miss. I believe these skills are directly applicable to investigating sophisticated white-collar crime." Miller and Davies exchanged another amused glance. "Pattern recognition, huh?" Davies chimed in, his tone patronizing. "For what, spotting a sale at the department store or figuring out the new crochet stitch?" Miller laughed outright this time. "Look, Ms. Parsons," Miller continued, leaning forward, his smirk widening, "we deal with hardened criminals, complex international schemes, dangerous people. It takes a certain type to succeed here. Someone tough, aggressive, someone who can command respect. With all due respect, you seem more suited to, shall we say, a quieter, less demanding profession." The implication was clear. She was too soft, too quiet, too feminine, too simple for the FBI. Sarah didn't flinch. She met their dismissive gazes with a calm, unwavering look of her own. "Agents," she said, her voice still quiet but now imbued with a steely resolve. "I understand your reservations. My resume may not scream traditional field agent, but I respectfully submit that the nature of white-collar crime is evolving. It's becoming more data-driven, more reliant on sophisticated digital obfuscation. The ability to see through that, to find the signal in the noise, is paramount. My track record in uncovering multi-million-dollar frauds, often with far fewer resources than the Bureau possesses, speaks to my capabilities in that specific arena." She opened her portfolio and slid a concise, powerfully written case study across the table. A fraud she had single-handedly unraveled at her previous firm, one that had stumped experienced investigators. Miller picked it up, glanced at it with feigned boredom, then tossed it back onto the table. "Impressive on paper, Ms. Parsons, but the real world of federal law enforcement is a different beast. We need people who can handle pressure, think on their feet in high-stakes situations, not just analyze spreadsheets." "Perhaps," Sarah countered gently, "analyzing those spreadsheets is thinking on one's feet in a high-stakes financial investigation. And handling pressure is something I've done consistently when presenting my findings to hostile corporate boards determined to bury the truth." The interview continued in this vein, with Miller and Davies peppering her with condescending questions, clearly trying to trip her up, to make her doubt herself, to expose her perceived lack of toughness. Sarah answered each question calmly, factually, refusing to be baited or intimidated. She presented her skills, her experience, her genuine passion for the work, without apology or embellishment. By the end of the hour, Miller and Davies still looked unconvinced, their smirks firmly in place. "Well, Ms. Parsons," Miller said, standing to signal the interview's end. "We'll be in touch. Don't call us, we'll call you." The dismissal was palpable. Sarah left the FBI building feeling dejected, but not defeated. She knew she'd faced an uphill battle. She also knew, with a quiet certainty, that they were profoundly underestimating her. She returned to her quiet life, to her meticulous work, though the sting of their dismissal lingered. She almost didn't expect to hear from the FBI again. Weeks later, much to Sarah's surprise, she received a conditional offer, not as a field agent, but for a probationary analyst position within the white-collar crime division, buried deep within a newly formed task force. The offer felt like a backhanded compliment, a token gesture, but it was a foot in the door. She accepted. The task force was grappling with a massive, seemingly impenetrable case. The Hydra Syndicate, a shadowy international organization suspected of laundering billions through a labyrinthine network of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and complex digital currency transactions. They had mountains of data, financial records, communication logs, surveillance reports, but no clear leads. The Bureau's top analysts, armed with the most sophisticated software, had been working on it for months, hitting one dead end after another. The case was becoming an embarrassment, the pressure mounting from on high. Sarah was assigned to a small cubicle in a forgotten corner of the task force office, given access to the Hydra data dump, and essentially told to see if you can find anything the real analysts missed. It was grunt work, meant to keep the unorthodox new hire busy and out of the way. Agents Miller and Davies, who were peripherally involved in the task force, would occasionally walk by her cubicle, offering pitying or still smirking glances. Sarah ignored them. She dove into the data, her mind lighting up with the challenge. For days, then weeks, she worked with a singular quiet focus, often late into the night, fueled by coffee and an unshakable belief that the pattern was there, hidden in plain sight. She wasn't just looking at numbers, she was looking for the story behind them, the human behaviors, the subtle deviations, the almost invisible threads that connected disparate pieces of information. While the other analysts ran complex algorithms looking for grand conspiracies, Sarah was looking for the small repeated errors, the tiny inconsistencies that often betray even the most sophisticated criminals. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, after nearly 3 weeks of relentless work, Sarah saw it. It wasn't a dramatic headline-grabbing piece of evidence. It was a tiny, almost insignificant anomaly in the transaction timestamps across three seemingly unrelated offshore accounts, a recurring digital echo that occurred precisely 0.7 seconds before a series of much larger, heavily encrypted data transfers. It was a pattern so subtle, so deeply buried in terabytes of noise, that every standard analytical tool had missed it. But Sarah, with her unique ability to visualize data flows and spot minute deviations, saw it clear as day. It was the digital equivalent of a faint, muddy footprint leading away from a crime scene. Her heart pounded. She triple-checked her findings, ran her own bespoke micro-analysis scripts, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The pattern held. It was the key, the entry point into the Hydra Syndicate's supposedly impenetrable communication network. She calmly printed out her findings. A single, concise page, with a few elegantly highlighted charts and a brief, devastatingly clear explanation of the anomaly and its implications. She walked out of her cubicle and directly towards the main task force briefing room, where the lead investigators, including a frustrated Agent Miller and a stressed Agent Davies, were in the middle of yet another fruitless strategy session. "Excuse me," Sarah said quietly, stepping into the room. All heads turned. Miller rolled his eyes. "Miss Parsons, we're in the middle of something important here. Can't your knitting patterns wait?" Sarah ignored him. She walked to the head of the table and placed her single sheet of paper in front of the bewildered task force commander. "Commander," she said, her voice calm but carrying a new weight of quiet authority, "I believe I found the back door to Hydra's communication network. It's right here." The room fell silent. The commander picked up the paper, his brow furrowed in skepticism. He read it. Then he read it again, his eyes widening slightly. He looked up at Sarah, then at the other analysts in the room, who were now staring. "Explain this to me, Miss Parsons," the commander said, his voice suddenly sharp with interest. Sarah, with quiet precision, walked them through her discovery, explaining the subtle timestamp anomaly, its consistent recurrence, and how it likely indicated a pre-transfer authentication handshake within a cloaked peer-to-peer network. She didn't use jargon. She used clear, logical language. She showed them how this tiny echo could be used to predict and intercept future data transfers, potentially revealing the syndicate's core operators. As she spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted from skepticism to disbelief, then to dawning, incredulous excitement. The real analysts, the ones with the advanced degrees and the sophisticated software, began frantically rerunning their own data through Sarah's hypothesis. Within minutes they confirmed it. The pattern was there. They'd all missed it. Agent Miller and Agent Davies sat stunned, their earlier mockery forgotten, their faces a mixture of shock and profound, unwilling respect. The task force commander looked at Sarah, no longer as the knitting club applicant, but as the quiet genius who had just handed them the key to cracking their biggest case. "Ms. Parsons," he said, his voice filled with genuine awe, "you may have just done in 3 weeks what this entire task force hasn't been able to do in 6 months. This is brilliant." He then turned to Miller and Davies. "Agents," he said, his voice like ice, "I believe you both owe Ms. Parsons an apology. And then, I suggest you both take some very detailed notes on advanced pattern recognition. Clearly you have a lot to learn." Sarah Parsons didn't gloat. She simply offered a small, polite nod. Her work had spoken for itself. The lead she provided directly led to the dismantling of the Hydra Syndicate, the arrest of its key figures, and the recovery of billions in illicit funds. Sarah was no longer the quiet analyst in the corner. She became an invaluable asset to the FBI, her unorthodox methods now celebrated, her insights sought after. Agents Miller and Davies, profoundly humbled, reportedly requested transfers to less data-intensive units. Sarah Parsons proved that true brilliance doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to fit a preconceived mold. Sometimes the quietest observer, the one everyone underestimates, is the one who sees the pattern that can change everything. Because in the complex web of crime and justice, the sharpest weapon isn't always a gun or a badge, but a mind that can find the almost invisible thread. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in the power of quiet intelligence and that heroes often come in the most unexpected packages.